Hello, welcome to the BoF Debian Policy and Developers Reference. Our hosts and facilitators for today are Sean and Holger, and if there's nothing else to declare, I'll hand it over to them right now.
Thank you for coming, everyone. I'm Sean.
I'm Holger.
I'm one of the two maintainers of Debian Policy, and Holger is the maintainer of the Debian Developers Reference. These two documents are the core documentation for Debian development as opposed to user documentation, and we use the same mailing list to develop both of them because often when people want to make contributions, we have to figure, there's a choice of which one to put it in. And the basic distinction is that Debian policy is normative in the sense of you have to do things this way, I guess, where there's some flexibility there. And it's about the contents of packages. Developer's reference is still normative, but meant to be slightly more flexible, I guess. And it's about how we work together rather than what we produce. But sometimes we have to think a bit about which one they go in, so we develop them together. So if the technical committee and the release team are about the contents of packages in the real world, policy is like the contents of packages in a perfect world, something like that, right? So when we figure things out and we're really sure about them, then we write them down in policy, and hopefully that serves as a reference for people who want to work on things in the future. And then when that perfect world meets the real world, then we have other processes, right? So working on policy is really chill because if there's any disagreement, it doesn't go anywhere, right? The idea is let's try to write down the lessons we've learned in making a distribution in this document and get it really nice and helpful and I think of policy as an output of Debian just like the distribution itself is. It's lessons learned, right? And one intended to be passed on. You want to introduce DevRef?
Well, DevRef is, as policy, also a Debian package, so you can install it. The developer's reference is more meant as a reference, so you can look up things. There's it's not a really packaging guide, but it refers to packaging guide, to best practices. It's been around for many years and became unmaintained in the early 2000s. I'm not sure when I picked it up, it was around 2020 or 19 or something. It used to be maintained for a long time in DocBook, which was very hard to edit. It's been marked down since a few years, and I'm also an editor in a way that I don't write it myself very much active, but rather try to gather contributions from other people. But unlike policy, I usually just accept anything people will send if it's remotely sensible. And in fact, I also encourage everyone to just commit to it, commit to the master branch, which will be turned into main at some point. Also patches for that welcome. You can either send patches to the BTS, you can commit directly, you can file bugs. But there's been 50 open bugs since 10 years. Developers' reference is a bit outdated in some parts. And I would like you all to fix it, to contribute to one thing which you see is outdated or which is not documented there. Please send patches, commit patches, and fix the things. And I will generally, if there's one sensible change, if it's a typo change even, usually I just upload the next day because it's not normative as policy.
Right. So now I've got to say that policy is harder to change, but still please contribute to policy too. So we have a changes process for policy. Basically, the idea is that we really don't want to make packages buggy by changing the rules, right? And we don't want to commit stuff that there isn't project consensus for into policy. So there's a process to slow it down a bit to try and avoid that. But it's all documented. It's all written down how it's meant to work. Should be pretty easy to pick up the README in Debian Policy Git and start working on it. That's the hope. And if it isn't, then we'd like to improve it. So I guess I could describe the maintainer role in that process. So me and Russ, our aim is to help things move through that process. So there's a stage of proposing an idea, there's a stage of writing the text, and we just want to be able to say, yep, this is project consensus, we'll send it through. The reality is that we end up doing most of the writing as well. So me and Russ end up writing pretty much all the patches. But that's not great because it means that there's no pipeline for new policy editors. So we'd really like people to come and work on the text, and we'll just help you polish it and get it through. But the reality is that people say, this is incorrect, please fix it, and we end up writing a lot of text. And there's only 2 of us, so we'd like that to change, I guess. That would be nice. So I think that's everything, right?
Yeah, and the developer's reference is also one goal is like if there's 50 packaging guidelines to have the best guidelines linked in the developer's reference. Can also be that there's whatever 2 ways to package Rust packages, and it's totally fine to put them both in developer's reference because both are really the way it's done now. Mm-hmm. It's not being deciding what's the best, but more what best practices are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as a summary, policy defines what's RC, basically, right? In a perfect world, release teams say what's RC in the real world. And developer's reference defines how to be nice and when we're working together, basically. Yeah. Let's talk about it.
Like developer's reference used to be more describing stuff, and that has moved a bit more into the wiki, which is a bit sad, or in wiki and a blog post and stuff, and it's nice to have one document which describes the practices.
Yeah. Are there people who would like to contribute to one of these documents but have held off for some reason? It would be really cool to talk about why. Someone told me that they think that policy is a bit intimidating because the other policy editor, Russ, is really smart. That's true.
You're also smart.
Well, but he's smarter. I mean, I can accept that.
How do you measure?
Well, I mean, I don't think I intimidate people as much as he does. Anyway, like that makes sense. That's kind of why we have this process. Like, there hasn't been anyone even interested, even writing an email about joining in policy who's new, since I did in 2017. And sometimes things are slower than they could be because it'd be nice if more people were involved. Like I said, it's really nice. Policy is really nice because if there's any disagreement, we just stop. It's too early for policy.
So, well, I actually think you both are really smart, and you're doing such a great job that I never feel any need to contribute because it's somehow working. So this is one of the things in Debian which is not that frequent, but yeah.
Well, thanks. But we have open bugs too, right? So there's large bits of Debian that aren't in policy, like triggers, right? Depackage triggers. If you want to know how they work, if you want a high-level overview, you have to basically read the spec and the implementation man pages, right? It would be great if policy was like, this is what triggers are all about. This is when you should be considering them, right? And that does, like it does for most other things. And that doesn't exist. Multi-arch. If I had to fix a multi-arch bug in one of my packages, I wouldn't know where to begin. Policy ought to be the place to begin.
Policy or the reference. I think both are candidates.
Yeah, both would be relevant on that question. Yeah.
I would expect this to be in the developer's relevant.
Multi-arch?
But it's neither.
Yeah.
Multi-arch is basically not documented officially.
Yeah.
Neither triggers.
Yeah.
You are right.
Nor reproducible builds.
I'm happy enough that my packages do not need triggers, so this is much
Well,
more.
but one of mine needed recently, right? Another thing is style. So policy was initially intended as basically a spec for Deb Helper. That's one way to summarize it. Does that make sense anymore? Russ doesn't think so. He'd like it to be more of a guidebook. Can it do both of these things? I know there's lots of fertile ground here. And the people are nice, and the existing stuff is in pretty good condition already.
And I was wrong. Reproducible builds are in policy, like packages should be reproducible, but that's about it. And I think it's also that's about it what should be in policy, but there should be more in reference. And it's also, I act as the editor of reference, but I don't have time to write it all up, and there's lots of stuff which should be in there. So I've been crying for help for this for a few years since it's marked down now. It's really easy to contribute. And
yeah. Because Russ and I think, like, even sometimes we want to write something, but we hold off because we don't want to burn ourselves out and then not be able to review other people trying to contribute. Like, I certainly take care of myself in that way.
Policy, in my experience, gets a bit more contributions by people seconding, supporting patches, but as Sean said, there's not so many people writing it. There's usually people who have one agenda and they start writing it.
Yeah.
Like Helmut wrote something about user merge, which is great, which I seconded, but
Yeah.
I do share Sean's concern that there should be more policy editors or a pipeline to get like trainees or whatever.
Yeah. Because I know I have a humanities degree. If someone gives me the text and I'm like says, can you like make this more policy appropriate or whatever, that's really very up for that. But starting from scratch every time, it's best if the domain experts do that, right? And then we can put it more into shape. But people kind of come along and they say, this is inaccurate. I'm like, okay, thanks for the bug report, but you know, well, patches will be good too. I guess that's always true, but you know what I mean.
I have personally another question. I care more for the policy checker, Lintian, which is sometimes lagging behind policy, which is not really good.
Right. Lynchian maintenance is a whole other thing, right? We don't have
No,
that.
it's not your topic, but it's also important, and I will advertise this in the afternoon.
So there's also PO parts, which is a policy compliance checker, which is well maintained by Nicholas.
Yeah.
Translations. We internationalized both of our documents, thanks mainly to Hideki. And we now have an actual translation. Someone in this room who won't let me name them has translated about 50% of policy. And Zumbi made a comment last week. He was like, well, why don't you try and get the upgrading checklist translated? Because that's what people really want to scan, right? Which I thought was very smart. So if anyone would like to translate the upgrading checklist, that would be really cool.
Developers reference has 6 translations at the moment, I think.
Really?
5, yeah.
Oh, man. That's so cool.
But they're a bit outdated, but they exist.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, wow. Come and translate policy.
But I see some danger in outdated translations, right?
Wait, but
Then it becomes
Tier 4A.
So if
Tier
it's
4A.
outdated, the streets.
So get okay.
Yeah. And policy has a clause saying if the translations disagree, then the English takes precedence.
And it's a good way for people to get involved, like translating,
Yeah.
it makes you understand it if you translate it. And there's other people usually in communities who are that good in English, so that also helps them.
Yeah. So, I don't know, you're meant to read the whole of both of these when you do the NM process, right? Or even before that. If you feel like translating it at the same time, that would be a great way to keep moving through the document, you know, instead of falling asleep with me and Ian Jackson's prose.
I have also long wished that as part of the NM process, people fix one bug against developers reference or policy.
Ooh, that would be
policy
cool.
bugs fixing is harder, but developers reference bugs of fixing is really easy. So I think an NM should fix one of these bugs. Would be great.
That's
What
nice.
is in the documents?
I feel like that might be out of our remit to just declare that everyone in the NM process has to help us. And we might start a cascade. But anyway.
I really like the idea to do this kind of contribution. Why not?
I think that's up to the people designing the NM process to decide what they want there.
Did you ask them?
I decline to comment.
We just
I might
learned that in the BoF before for FTP master, we just learned nobody has brought up the questions to the right people. But seems we have wide agreement about everything. So.
So
It's easy to agree in person and disagree online. It's easier.
So, are there things, I'm bothered by triggers not being documented, right? Are there things that people think should be there that aren't? Be nice to kind of know what needs are being served and less served. Andreas has no requests.
As I said, I'm so happy that I don't need this to actively in my packages. So. Sorry. No.
What are the thoughts of other people in this room?
Well, okay, maybe I can start some discussion by talking about some misconceptions. Some people misunderstand the standard version field policy, right? So, like, when are you meant to update it, right? So, the idea of that field, policy lags implementation, and packages can be allowed to lag as well. The idea of that field is to make it possible for you not to update stuff, right? So, the guideline is once per release cycle, per package, look at the standards version, suppose it's 4.5, right? You go to the upgrading checklist, you scroll down to 4.5, and you read backwards up to the top and see if there are any updates that are needed, and then you change standards version to the version at the top. But don't do it if you've got other more important things to do. Right? The idea of the standards version field is that things can be allowed to lag, and then someone else can update it at any other point. It's like a coordination mechanism. That's what's going on with that. Well, we don't have to just sit here. If people are as happy as they seem to be. Thank you very much. Are you okay with ending?
I'm okay with ending.
Yeah. All right.
Then people had...
Oh, yeah? Sorry?
Please take the mic. In the code description.
Yeah.
It's mentioned that there are bugs, you are stuck with them.
Yeah.
You actively are seeking volunteers in some areas. Can we have some info on that?
Right.
Besides triggers.
Right. Triggers, multi-arch. Those the big ones. Well, okay. Let's Holger and I have a quick look, if you don't mind waiting for a moment. I guess I should have done this before.
So, policy has 185 open bugs, which is quite many. Developer reference has only around 41. So.
This is true.
But they are easier. So 41 easy bugs.
Can you show me the policy open bugs? My
Debian org.
But my P key doesn't work, so I can't type policy. Thank you. So, policy bugs get stuck because we haven't got consensus, right? Which is fine. Right. Here's a nice example. So the files excluded field isn't documented, apparently. Right? So it'd be really cool if someone would just edit that in. It's not controversial at all. And then some new contributor can look at what it means and how it's formatted, and they save asking a question on IRC. I mean, that's a nice example.
Generally, both bugs pages are well classified into.
Yeah, we have a bunch of user tags. So this there's a bug here which says that there's a particular bit of main script flow which isn't documented. So main scripts are meant to be documented in an accessible way in policy. It seems that this particular flow, I didn't realize this, pre-RM deconfigure is not, right? So you want to go and look at the dpackage man pages, which have all the details, figure out what would be most helpful for everyone to know, and learn something along the way. Like that kind of thing is nice.
Sensible terminal is not documented.
Yeah. I don't know what sensible terminal is, but it came up for me the other day. Be nice to.
The other sensible tools are documented.
Yeah. The test suite triggers field apparently isn't documented. Right. I mean, I guess one thing might be just if you're using something new and you don't find it in policy and you learn about it, then it's really fresh in your mind. It'd be really cool to have a patch because then the next person is already there.
Policy 9.3 starting system services is largely obsolete. So this is all also in developers reference, the old and new init system.
I think I need to commit myself to the files excluded field because I once invented it. So.
Okay, I'll hold you to it. It's on record. It's
Ask me
recorded.
what is it. Send me the bug number. I checked myself.
There's also easy stuff like document architecture names definitions.
I guess with writing new bits into the policy, it may be even harder than writing new bits of documentation because when, for example, you have a program and it has a feature which is not in documentation and you probably wrote that program and you know how does the feature work, you create some text, you put it into the documentation, which is straightforward, even though hard sometimes. And for the policy, it's not documentation. It's kind of documentation, but like the field, the test suite triggers, the files excluded, something like that. You as a Debian contributor, where should you start writing the policy bit about it? You not only need to know how does it work, you also need to know what to put into policy about it. If I can phrase it correctly. Like, are there some bits you don't know about or something you need to require, for example? And it's often not clear where to get this.
Right. Well, so that's the contribution you're making when you fix something in policy, is that you're making sure that everyone else doesn't run into that blind alley. So there's no one-size-fits-all solution, but you can just imagine if there was something in policy, what would you want it to be, right? Like, I need to know about this thing for my package. What would I have to know? And then other people are going to review it, right? You write it down, and then I'm probably going to look at the wording, and someone like Simon McVitie will come along and point out something you didn't consider. And there are people who read that list, but someone's got to start it.
And there's also people like would say this is not appropriate for policy, but good for developers reference.
Right.
So
it's very rare that I can't think of any case where someone comes with something and it doesn't fit in either document, right? So don't worry too much. Thanks, that was a great question. Well, I think we can leave it there. Thanks very much, everyone. Appreciate it.
also, if you want to talk to us later, not on camera, please do. And thank you for being here and helping with these documents.